Very welcome to. Forgot about that, Katie. So you're all very welcome to the. Now it will be recorded. Um, but I'm pinned, so I'm the only one that will be seen on screen. The speaker will be the only one who's seen on screen. So you needn't be worried about being sort of broadcast across YouTube or that. If you do speak, your voice will be will be heard. But otherwise, yeah, don't worry about your video being seen. So yeah, my name is Maitrikaya. So I'm going to be sort of hosting the course, teaching the course, whatever way you want to put it. So again, welcome to the Dublin Buddhist Centre online. This might be one of our last fully online courses, hopefully, if COVID stays where it should. A lot of our courses now are going sort of hybrid at the very least. So this might be the last course I be teaching from my shrine room here rather than at the Buddhist Centre. So it's like, as well as myself, we have a number of team members, apart from like that, and they're sort of the main. I don't want to sort of belittle everybody else, but the main help I have is Katie, who you will see as Dublin Buddhist Centre. Katie is the tech support. There's Katie. Katie's giving you a wave now. So Katie is the tech support, and I'm totally reliant on tech support, because without that, I'd be totally lost. I'd have to do everything technical myself, and I just couldn't do it. So, but we will be going into discussion groups each week on the course, and to help with that and support that, there are various people, and they have team before their name. So there's Dolores, there's Tom, there's Rob, there's Lindsay, and Stephen, and Carol. There's Carol. So yeah, they will be like, they're people with some at various levels of experience in Buddhism, who will be sort of guiding you in the discussions in the breakout rooms each week. So we do that each week. So I'll say a little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Maitrikaya. I've been, I don't know how long I could say. I've been meditating for over 40 years. Not consistently for 40 years, unfortunately. I've fallen in and out of it, but I've came in contact with the Dublin Buddhist Centre first about 16 years ago, and I've had a daily meditation practice since then. I was ordained 11 and a half years ago, and I was given this name Maitrikaya, which means body of loving kindness, and that's an aspiration rather than something that, like, I sort of live out of all the time. So it's actually a reminder all the time when you're maybe not in the best of, and we'll be discussing things like this in the course. Maybe when I'm not in the best of mental states, it sort of pulls me up and says, what's your name? Maitrikaya, body of loving kindness. Maybe you should remember that when you're not in the best of mental states. But anyway, that's the Dublin Buddhist Centre is part of a worldwide network of Buddhist centres, part of something called the Tri-Ratna Buddhist community, and it's supported by the Tri-Ratna Buddhist order, which I'm a member of, and I'm wearing around my neck what's called a kesa. We don't wear robes because we're not monastic. We're not lay either. It's something that sort of transcends the lay monastic paradigm. Some of us live in semi-monastic settings in retreat centres and that. I live by myself in a house not far from Croke Park in North Dublin. some people live in communities, some of them with partners who don't live in the communities, obviously, some single. It really, what our teacher says is that commitment is primary, lifestyle is secondary. So the commitment to the Buddhist path and to practice is the primary thing. So we are a charity and we're reliant on donations from people. I'll say a little bit more about this. So this course is free. That's why we have been trying to sort of live out of what we call a dana economy since COVID began. So for the last 2 years or more. And it's something we've had aspired to for a long time, and like it was kind of forced on us with COVID and when we had to go online. And it has worked very well. People have been very generous. People have responded to this dana economy. But we are totally dependent on people's on donations. So we offer the course for free. It's based on the basis of take what you need, give what you can, and that's the sort of the idea behind the dana economy. So I'm going to sort of say a little thing about this 6 weeks course, Know Your Mind. So it's based on, well, two senses. It's based on this book, Mind in Harmony, by a senior order member called, you will have seen that in the blurb for the course, based on, so the psychology of Buddhist ethics, it's how it's subtitled, by a senior order member called Subhuti. But it's also based on a book by our teacher, Sangharashita, called Know Your Mind, which is a commentary on something older again, which is the Abhidhamma. Again, I'll say something about that later. So what I do now is sort of to give you an overview of what we'll be doing. Like just a brief. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the sort of each week, but I'm just going to give you a sort of a list really of what we'll be doing over the next 6 weeks of the course. So I'm going to share my screen, and the first time, this is always sort of a bit sort of awkward first time. There we go. So the first week, we'll be doing introductions, like I've done a brief introduction here. Introduction to the course, introduction to me. We'll get you to introduce yourselves to each other. It's important we'll sort of be a community for the next 6 weeks here. So get you to introduce yourselves to each other. I'll say something more about that shortly. What we'll be doing this morning is mainly what I've entitled Watching the Mind. So we'll be looking at the mind. What is the mind? What happens in our mind? What's our experience of our mind? So we'll look at that in various ways. I talk a lot, unfortunately, but there will be time for you to sort of ask questions. And actually I would encourage you to ask questions. That's how we learn really, is by asking questions. Particularly just throw stuff into chat, and I'll try and sort of keep an eye on the chat and answer it at the end of my sort of particular section I'm talking about, or sort of in the middle of it if I can. So that's what we'll be doing this morning. In week 2 we'll be looking at what we call the constants. So there are a number of things. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this at the moment. There are a number of things in our experience which are constant all of the time, no matter what our mental states are. They are constant in our experience. So one of them is called Vedana. It's feeling tone. So we have these feeling tones in our body, and so that is that's one of the constants. I'm not going to say too much more about that. So that's what we look at next week. We're going to look at the constants in our experience. And then on Week 3, we look at the intensifiers. So things that intensify when our mind becomes absorbed, particularly in meditation. But our mind doesn't just become absorbed in meditation. It can become absorbed outside meditation. My mind can become particularly absorbed listening to classical music. Mozart cello suites come to mind, but it can become, people can find all an art practice, for instance, like friends who are painters can say their minds can become really absorbed practicing their art. So, and these intensifiers will come into play when our mind becomes absorbed. And in week 4, we will look at 3 things that sort of increase as our mind becomes absorbed, as our practice deepens. So a sense of contentment, a sense of goodwill, and a sense of compassion. And then week 5, again, as our practice deepens, we will look at a sense of ardour, like a sort of sense of, well, I leave it for a moment. I won't try and sort of go into that now. A sense of serenity that sort of surrounds our experience, and a sense of equanimity, a sense of seeing things as equal. People, things around us, experience, a sense of equanimity around our experience as we deepen. And then at week 6, we look at mindfulness and the psychology of liberation. So what it means, what we basically will look at is the Buddha's experience of enlightenment. And we will try and experience that by recollecting the Buddha. So that's what we're going to try and do in the final week of the course. So for today, what we're going to do, we're going to sort of, again, with the introductions, which we'll do shortly for yourselves, we look at the purpose of the course. Like, so what are we trying to do by doing this course? We sort of ask the question, why watch the mind? Why would we bother to watch the mind? We look at wholesome and unwholesome states of mind. So I've talked about, with regard to myself, sort of negative states of mind and my states of mind. We'll have a tea break for about 10 minutes, just because there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of absorbing, and just to get up and stretch our legs and get a cup of tea and that. Then we look at, after the break, we look at what is the mind. And then we try and practically experience what the mind is in 2 reflections, sort of meditative reflections. And then we will, I'll give you sort of an idea of what you will do for the rest of the week to try and experience what we've been talking about during the morning. So I'll stop that share now. I think the next thing is to sort of go into these breakout rooms that I've been talking about. So what I want you to do is to introduce yourselves to each other. Say briefly why you're here on the course and what your expectations, what your aspirations might be for the course. It's kind of wide open. But the main thing is you're going to be in the same groups for the whole 6 weeks. So it'll be a chance to really sort of go deeply with each other. We're going to be sharing our minds with each other over the next 6 weeks. So you will get to know these people really well, probably, over the next 6 weeks. So if you're ready, so you'll be in these groups for 10 minutes. So it'll probably 4 to a group, Katie, yeah? And so you'll be sort of little over 2 minutes each then, to sort of introduce yourselves, say briefly why you're here on the course, what you want to get out of the course, what your expectations, what do you think might be your expectations for the course are, and anything else that might come up during the 10 minutes. Okay, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes time at It's 46 now, so 10:56. Okay? Enjoy the chat. Am I pinned, Katie?
You are, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I think that's everybody back. We might actually have gained somebody. I don't think there were 23 there when we began. Right. So yeah, like I said, we'd start with a. I hope you enjoyed the groups, by the way. It was never my favourite activity when we're doing all this face to face. I was quite shy. I'm no longer as shy as I used to be, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. So I said we'd start with talking about the purpose of the course. So basically, the purpose of this course is to, like, first principles, is to describe the mind from the Buddhist point of view. So that's where we're starting from. And then we're going to sort of, the idea is that we use this description as a tool for transforming the mind. So it becomes more ethical and we find greater fulfillment out of that. And ultimately, the goal of Buddhist practice is to gain liberation or enlightenment. So that's the whole idea behind it. So the main thing that I find from this course and the material, that gives you a language to be able to speak about your experience, to some extent with great precision. I don't think that's something that we normally have. Especially about our mental states, which I think we often find hard to describe in any detail. So everything in the course aims to be practical, though it can feel like if you read the book, and we will give you notes every week. There'll be an email every week. Which will come. This is being recorded, so if you miss any of it, any week you miss you miss a week of the course, there will be an email that will come every week with the recording of the week, and there will be notes every week. So you can do the course, but just reading those notes. I would recommend that you get the book and read it, but you don't have to. If you're really interested in what we're doing, you could read the book, but there's a lot of it is very abstract, but at the same time, as I said, very practical. So what I'm hoping is that the course will provide a handbook for transforming our mind through sort of a sense of systematic training. And especially what's important with it, it's that it's transformative in the sense of ethics. And so in the ethical area of our life. As I said, much of the material in the course comes from Subhuti's Mind and Harmony book. And there are two main sources for his book, which was the Sangharakshita's Know Your Mind book, which is where the name of the course came from. And the other is the Abhidharma. Now, the Abhidharma is an early Buddhist text, which is often described, I think it's an abstract, highly technical systemization of Buddhist doctrine. But it's simultaneously a philosophy, a psychology, and it's like an ethical exploration as well. So it's all sort of integrated into a framework. And particularly different schools of Buddhism have different sort of abhidharmas, if you like. What we're particularly going to explore is based on a school called the Yogacara. And the Yogacara is particularly concerned with the nature of our mind. And it's often called the mind-only school. So the Abhidharma offers lists of mental events that are said to make up all of our mental activity. Subhuti said that his main aim in writing the book was to help people recognize their mental states for what they really are. So that's what we're going to try and sort of explore over the next 6 weeks, was that, like, recognize our mental states for what they really are and be able to label them in a sense, and maybe in labeling them, understand the ethical significance of them, and hopefully to actually know our minds, if not know our minds a little better. And how we might do that is by watching the mind. But like, why watch the mind? So Buddhism is a path. You might have, I'm not sure what the level of experience of Buddhism that any of you, I never assumed that, because people, even newcomers to the centre, come, like these days, people have all sorts of experience of Buddhism and of meditation and that before they come near a Buddhist centre. But like, so Buddhism is a path, and by definition there's a sense of wanting or even needing to make progress on any path towards a goal. So that's the nature of a path, really. So and in the case of Buddhism, that's ultimately enlightenment. So no matter how vague or our idea or concept of that is, that's the ultimately what our goal is within Buddhism, is this idea of enlightenment. But how does one make progress towards that? Well, we start by taking our practice deeper. That's what we do. Like, if we're going on a path, like we start taking our practice deeper. But the question might come up, how can I go deeper? And that might arise at several stages on the path, as we travel the path, between the different stages of, like, our initial exploration. And like, the early stages can be either short or long. There's no sort of, like, you say, okay, this one takes 6 weeks, this one takes a month, like, whatever. It's like, the stages are as long as they are for us. And our needs are simple, and it doesn't take, and it doesn't really vary very much. We get a very outline sort of understanding of Buddhism. We explore Buddhist practice, and we build links of friendship with other Buddhism. That's essentially how the path sort of develops. And after that, we be confident that the path is one that we want to follow, if that's what we come to. And then we make a decisive commitment to Buddhism. We decide maybe that we are Buddhists, and to a specific context that we want to practice within. Say our tradition, the Tri-Ratna Buddhist community, but there are lots of other traditions. And it's then that the difficulties and obstacles emerge, when we take our practice that bit deeper. It might not be clear to us how to go deeper in meditation, maybe, or how to relate to other people with more kindness and patience. Or we might start to find more tricky states of mind that are there within us. We might suddenly sort of, as we go deeper, we find deeper things within us that we find a bit more difficult to deal with, a bit more tricky. For example, we might find sort of like states of mind like ill will, lack of emotional engagement, a sense of vagueness maybe, all of which we'll be exploring over the 6 weeks of the course. So we start to see the need for a system of training for the mind. So we need to sort of train the mind. And this is where the material from both Subhuti's book and from Sangharakshita's book, Know Your Mind, and from the Abhidharma come into play. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is training the mind. And to train the mind, we need to know the mind. And to know the mind, we need to watch the mind. So we can practice at all times, especially when we're on our own and nobody is watching. That's when we really need to do it, because it's easy to do it when other people are around us and are essentially watching us, how we're behaving. But it's not always so easy when we're on our own and nobody is watching. So, and Subhuti called this the morality of the private moment. When you know you should be practicing, you should be practicing ethics, for instance, what we know you should be practicing the Dharma. But because nobody is watching, you don't. We're all faced with situations like this when we come to our moral crossroads, for instance, or of some sort, where there's no social pressure on us to no sort of external incentives at all. So you might sort of, I don't know, you might be put in a situation where you'd be in somebody's room, say, and there's a letter open lying on the table, and maybe you might be tempted to read the letter, or someone leaves their email open and you might be tempted to peek at their email, or you're alone in your own room in a state of tiredness or whatever, and you abandon mindfulness, and you just sort of go endlessly searching on the internet for stimulation, or playing computer games or whatever, and we all know the way that can lead, and when practice goes deeper, then what most people wouldn't view as a moral issue, but can go against spiritual principles, can come up for us. Sometimes a lack of mindfulness that stops us sort of overworking, or we don't see that we're overworking, and stops us resting. That can be an ethical issue. So the key to all this whatever level we're on, is to guard the mind, and initially that means being in touch with one's thoughts and feelings, and being able to detect impulses arising before they take hold, basically. Breath. So in the Dharma life, in the Buddhist life, we constantly need to go deeper, unless we stay in anything we do. Say I referred to an art practice earlier. I did Tai Chi for as a martial art for many years, and I had a great sense with that. If we don't constantly sort of have a sense of going deeper, we stagnate. So it's the same with the Dharma life. It's the same with a Buddhist practice, and if we stagnate, we aren't going anywhere with her. It's like a pond that has no flow through it. It just stagnates. So if to go deeper, we need two things. We need a continual sort of application of effort. And so the Buddha's sort of last words before he died were, strive on with mindfulness. That's a kind of it's not exact translation of what he said, but he said strive on with mindfulness. And so life is short, and we need to seize the moment, if you like, the chance to make effort. So spiritual life, Buddhist practice, is a full-time occupation. It's not a hobby. It's not something we attach onto our life. It is a full-time occupation. It doesn't mind, because our life is our practice. Whatever we're doing, our work life, our family life, everything is practice. And one good thing about this material, that it encourages us to bring it all aspects of our experience in our day, as part of our practice. And the other thing is the spiritual equivalent is like a spiritual equivalent of a map and a compass. So like a spiritual sat-nav, if you like. So it's a way of naming what's going on inside us so that we can see what we have to change and how to change it. So we need to watch the mind to know the mind. And we can do this by using the lists, if you like, of the Abhidharma. And this can be our map, our compass. And this is particular, we're going to see, we're going to be using Subhuti's material here. So, mind watching. How do we watch the mind again? So I want to share something with you again. Sorry. I will when I get my... Now, there we go. Yeah. My mouse is a bit sticky this morning. There we go. So there's this Buddhist text called the Dhammapada. Some would say it's a very, very early Buddhist text. But we'll take it as read that it is. Not everybody would agree that it is. So it says, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows even as a cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox, drawing the cart. So I'll read that again. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So, what this is essentially saying is that mind is the basis of all experience. So all our experience comes from our experience of mind. And this doesn't mean that the external world is a mirage, rather that the situation we find ourselves in is generally the result of our own behaviour. And the ultimate source of our behaviour is our own mind. And the main force governing what happens to us in the present is the thoughts and desires that we have allowed to sway us in the past. And the mental states are of two kinds. So they're pure and they're impure. Now, I think we have to be careful how we view these words, this pure and impure, the sense of purity and impure. So the predominance of either pure or impure elements in our mental states determine the kind of experience that we have. So experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows even as the cart which follows the hoof of the ox. So the purity in question is an ethical or spiritual purity. It doesn't mean we're inherently if we're talking about the pre-enlightened Buddha, if you like, what if I were to divide my thoughts? He thought, what if I to divide my thoughts into two classes? So thoughts of craving, of ill will and cruelty. So these were, he thought, unwholesome, impure states, unskillful mental states. So these are sort of impure states of mind. And thoughts of, on the other hand, thoughts of renunciation, non-ill will and non-cruelty. So these he thought of as wholesome, pure states of mind. So skillful mental states. So unwholesome mental states lead us away from enlightenment, away from freedom. So states of mind based upon greed, hatred, delusion, and so on. And these are always connected with suffering. They either cause us suffering or they cause other people suffering. And we see this, when we really see this, it's easier for us to let go of them. And they're painful in themselves. And they can cause suffering for others too, as I said. And ill will is unpleasant for us. It's not good to feel ill will. It doesn't feel good to feel ill will. And doing ill will, we will hurt other people. And craving something to happen is painful. It feels painful when we feel this sense of tightness within us. And in craving something pleasant, we might hurt someone in our eagerness to get it, or deprive someone else of the thing that they want. So wholesome mental states, on the other hand, lead us towards enlightenment, towards freedom, or towards the sense of sort of in that direction anyway. They are based upon loving kindness, upon compassion, a sense of renunciation, not craving, a sense of wisdom, and so on. And they're pleasant in themselves, pleasant in their consequences. So there are two kinds of mental states, broadly speaking. And that's what we're going to be exploring. We're going to be exploring many of these positive and negative mental states on the course over the next 6 weeks. So happiness is the product of a pure mind, and suffering is the product of an impure mind. So that's what our experience in the real world is. That's what our direct experience is. That happiness is the product of a pure mind, suffering is the product of an impure mind. So then the key to happiness is then the purification of our mind. So the mind produces its own happiness or suffering according to the purity of its states. And this is the Buddhist doctrine of karma, which is usually very misunderstood. We look at that next week in more detail. But how do we purify our mind? We watch the mind. We spot what the mind is up to. Sensing its ethical quality so that we can improve it. We work to lessen and let go of negative states of mind, and we work to cultivate and deepen positive states of mind. So yeah, very simple, yeah? Well, maybe not as simple as it would first appear. It all sounds very simple till we try and put it into practice and we deal with the world or our own mind as we see it. In relation to all this, the Buddha said that whatever we frequently think and ponder upon will become the inclination of our mind. And so habit is a powerful force in the mind. So we talk about the force of habit. And the more we allow ourselves to think in a certain way, the more we will tend to think that way in the future. So the habitually pure mind will have an increasingly happy experience of the world. And the habitually impure mind will find life getting more and more problematic and painful. And I can get that from my own experience. I was I had a lot of anger in my life in a previous existence, like before I really started to meditate on that. And I had a real sense of that there was my life got more and more difficult, more and more problematic and painful because of the nature of my mind, because of the anger and ill will in my mind. It was just a sense of like I had anger in my mind, so I became an angry man. And then when I started practicing meditation, there was a sense of a shift in that. I won't sort of say that I had a pure mind, but I had a purer mind. There was less anger in my mind. So there was an increasingly happier experience. I won't say totally happy, but it was increasingly happier experience. So imagine the image of water running down a hillside, I think is good. The more it runs over the hillside, the more it cuts in, the more powerful the force of water flowing is. And it'll even cut through rock over time. So we get the power of a waterfall. So that can be sort of a negative. So it can be our anger cutting through and creating this sort of rut in our lives. But it can also be the positive sense where we sort of develop this sense of loving kindness and that being our experience. So the central task of the spiritual life is to try gradually and skillfully, and it is like gradual, to stop our thoughts from cutting unskillful channels and then making them, and to make them flow into skillful channels. So that's essentially what we're at, and that has been my experience. So to get to know and train the mind, and over time to sort of, it'll get much easier and to get continually quicker at doing it. That's essentially what my experience has been so far of working with my mind. So any questions? What comments on what I've said so far? There's been a lot. So you can put questions, comments into chat. There's one. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's what's going on in our mind. Who was that? Maitrikaya. Yes, definitely. There's no question of the person being. It's not like I don't want to be sort of, but my experience of pure and impure from like my previous Christian, like I gave up a belief in God when I was 14, and my just exactly. I'm comparing it to the Christian tradition I gave up when I was 14, and what I sort of absorbed from that was that like the person was inherently pure or impure depending on what they were doing. That's not, because there's a great sort of emphasis on change and impermanence in Buddhism. There's a great sense that we can change, and we can sort of bring about that change. We can move from these impure states of mind to pure states of mind. So like there's no sense that like I am an impure person, or like that I am even a pure person, because that can change depending on the way we are allowing our mind to operate. They're flying in here. That's a big, the relationship between the mind and consciousness. We might look at that later on. What is the mind? Do we know what the mind is? We'll be looking at that in the second half. So I might leave that till the second half, till we might discover for ourselves what is the mind? Like, where is the mind? No, I don't think that the mind in pain, does a mind in pain constitute, Alexandra, does a mind in pain constitute an impure mind? if ill will is directed to oneself as opposed to others. Well, a mind in pain doesn't have to be an impure mind. We don't have to sort of react to pain. We can respond creatively to whatever going on in our experience. If we are feeling ill will and we're sort of directing at ourselves, yes, that is the same ill will directed towards ourselves as ill will we will direct towards other people. So yeah, they are impure or unskillful. Let's use the word unskillful and skillful in this sense. They are unskillful mental states if we are directing sort of ill will towards ourselves. So we need to transform that too, and not sort of direct the ill will towards ourselves. And there are practices that we practice to help us do that. One of them being the main one being the metta-bhavana, the development of loving kindness, where we direct that towards ourselves. It's not really Evie, it's not really positive thinking. It's more about positive emotion, about skillful skillful action, a skillful mental action. It's not really about sort of trying to be sort of, if you like, sort of thinking positively all the time, because that's not possible. We're in a sense we're because like life isn't like that. But it's to try and because we can't always get a positive outcome from life. It's about being sort of having positive mental states around whatever going on in our lives. Now, positive mental states are not necessarily related to positive outcomes. So it's not allowing sort of non-positive sort of results or negative results, negative outcomes, to allow to sort of cause us to spiral into negative mental states. So like things like ill will and that. So still having this sense of loving kindness, of sort of a sense of more sort of positive mental state. So there's no sort of there's no equation of sort of positive mental states and positive outcome. They're sort of they can exist. Like you can have negative outcomes and have positive mental states. I hope that answers the question adequately. We don't have to sort of be in sort of have positive outcomes to be in positive mental states. Yeah, it may be something like sort of Kathleen, the whole idea of sort of overworking and not resting. It's maybe something that might come as our practice deepens. Yeah, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't think of it as something ethical, but like as our practice deepens, we can probably see things that we wouldn't normally see as an ethical issue. Well, in order to like sort of who's that? Lazarus Tony. Skillful action and mindful action. Well, in order to act skillfully, we need to be mindful. So essentially, yes, if we're mindful, we will naturally act skillfully. So they do kind of run in parallel. It's hard to I don't think we can act unskillfully and act mindfully. Yeah, I'm trying to think from my own experience when I acted mindfully, and because a sense of mindfulness would sort of would make me think about what I was doing and stop the sort of unskillfulness, I think. Yeah, so I don't think I think they are the same thing, or they bring about the same result. Okay, I think what we'll do now is take a break. I know I need a break. I've talked a lot. So we'll take a 10-minute break so you can stretch your legs, I can stretch my legs, and so get a cup of tea, get a drink of water, whatever you need to do. And it's 11:33. So let's say like we take a break until 11:45, and I'll see you back here at 11:45, and we'll look at what is the mind, and we'll try and explore what is the mind, where is the mind, etc. So we might answer that question about the mind and consciousness. We might not answer it either, but we might get a little closer to what it might be. We might discover that we can't. But anyway, I'll see you at 11:45 then. Okay. Start back in. Okay, we'll start back in a minute or so. So yeah, you can just see the slide on screen, and Katie has also put it into chat, the link. Just to remind you again, the course is free and absolutely free, but we are dependent on donations, on people's generosity. So if you can make a donation, we'd be very, very grateful. How big or how small is totally up to you. We're grateful for anything we can get. So there's the link at the bottom there. There's also a link to our website up the top there, and as I said, it's also in chat there from Katie. So yeah, I'll just stop that share now. I did want to just, somebody asked, well actually I'll go to a couple of questions. Carol said something which I thought was useful. Carol said for her practicing, mindfulness helps her to make better choices, even when not as aware. So it nurtures a sense of kindness and creativity that has slowly been changing responses to the world, even in a more automatic level. So that's, essentially, I couldn't have put it better myself, Carol. It does. It helps to change our responses on a very automatic level when we when we practice. And it helps us to respond to the world in a much better way. I did want to, the Maitrikaya, I think, it was Maitrikaya, was curious about where Tri-Ratna sat or fell into the Buddhist world. So the Tri-Ratna Buddhist community was set up by an Englishman, Sangharakshita, who wrote this book, Know Your Mind. He was discovered he was a Buddhist when he was 16, but luckily, and had been involved in something called the English Sangha Trust. But luckily, I guess, was conscripted into the British Army at the start of the Second World War and was sent to India with the Signals Corps. Now, he never fought, his Signals Corps, and at the end of the war, he essentially deserted and wandered the roads of India in robes, and eventually came in contact with many Buddhist teachers. His first teacher was an Indian, Jagdish Kasaba, and who left him in a place in West Bengal called Kalimpong and told him to stay there for the good of Buddhism. And when the Chinese invasion of Tibet happened, a lot of Tibetan teachers came across the border, and he had lots of contact with those Tibetan teachers. The most important of whom was a Lama called Dardo Rinpoche, and he developed a strong connection, a strong friendship actually with Dardo Rinpoche. And eventually, to make a long story, after many years, 20 odd years, Dardo Rinpoche suggested that he got a letter to come back to England, but Dardo Rinpoche suggested he stay in the UK and bring Buddhism to the West. And he eventually started in 1968. He founded this, what was called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order originally, but it's no longer, like in, what year was it? 2012. The name was changed. We've been trying to change the name for many years, but we couldn't get an agreement on what to change the name to. And Sangha said, look, I'm changing the name. I'm not trying to get an agreement anymore, to Tri-Ratna Buddhist community. And Tri-Ratna means the three jewels, and the three jewels are the most important thing in Buddhism. There's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So yeah, this is, and we don't fit into any of the traditional schools of Buddhism. What Sangharash's idea would be go back to the original teachings of the Buddha. And although we do take inspiration from the sort of later schools as well. A lot of our ritual practices would come from the later schools, but our inspiration comes from something called the Pali Canon, and we study that a lot. So that's in a nutshell and it's now a worldwide community in like Western Europe, Eastern Europe, like Poland, Estonia. Unfortunately, the state of things in Eastern Europe at the moment are not good. So I feel for some of our sort of brethren, if you like, in Eastern Europe. But in Australasia, North and South America, all over the world basically. But it's particularly strong in the UK where it was founded. There are lots of centres all over Europe. We have one centre in Dublin, but we have people practising in Killaloe. There's a big group in Killaloe in sort of Clare Tipperary, and also there are people in Westport in County Mayo. But we are all over the world. So the other question, and thanks Carol for putting that in. Does suffering arise from identification? It often does arise from identification, from over-identifying with ourselves, and ourselves over-identifying with being a certain way. And not so much identifying with ourselves, but disidentifying with ourselves as a fixed object, with being a certain way. So me as being an angry man. So not identifying with being a certain way. That we can be some other way, we can change, we can move on, we can be something else. No, it's not a form of escapement. It's an actual realization that we can change, that we don't have to be a certain way, that we don't have to exist in a certain way. We can change how we are. We don't have to be fixed. That we are not. In fact, the reality is that we are not fixed. I hope that sort of that we don't actually have individual roles that we have to fulfill. It's not written in stone. We are not written in stone. We don't have individual roles that are sort of some traditions would have it, that are fated to us. We are who we make ourselves to be. Like the Dharmapada says, all our experience are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. And whether that's a positive experience or the negative experience is down to the state of mind that we're in. And we can have dreams and hopes and that exists at the same time, but we don't over-identify with those dreams and hopes. I hope that answers the question. So let's look at what is the mind. And there is no satisfactory answer to this, and I wish I had an answer for you, because I don't have an answer. I don't know anybody that has. We can be aware of things with the mind. We can be aware of a chair, for instance. We can be aware of the window that's just on the other side there of me. But in Buddhism we call these things objects of the mind, things that we experience with the mind. But the mind is different to these. The mind is not an object. Mind is the subject which perceives the object. The mind is not definable in the way that we can define a chair. We can take, there's a chair on the right hand side of me. I can define that chair in a certain way, as from its shape, from what it's made up of. But I can't or the window, I can decide that it's what the window is made up, its shape again, how it opens, and what light is coming through it or whatever. But we still, even though we can't define the mind like that, we still have to have a working definition of the mind. Mind has three essential characteristics. Firstly, it's transparent. It's like a flawless window pane. The window pane in front of me there is not flawless. You can see through it, but you can't see the pane of glass itself. Consciousness looks out from the inside. Seeing the mind via the mind is like the eye trying to look around at its socket. So it's like trying to turn the mind around to look at itself. Or it's like the tongue trying to taste itself. So you can't see the mind with the mind. So we kind of have to abandon any hope of finding an object that we can call the mind. It doesn't exist in the world of objects. So the mind isn't brain. Sometimes we get we have this idea of the mind being brain. The mind is outside of brain. Mind isn't brain. It's more than brain. We might have some sense of the mind from the brain, but the mind is much more than brain. Secondly, the mind is cognition. Now, cognition means knowing. And this is a very broad sense. Every state of mind must have some object. Okay? Every mental state is necessarily about something, or of something, or for something. And the mind at work includes not only the thought of an object, but also the feelings and desires around that. So on that level, we have in relation, so what we have in relation to that object. So we can't have a mind that's independent of the object that it's focusing on. So like if I'm looking at the chair, like my mind doesn't exist independent of the thoughts and the feelings that are going on independent of that chair. So let's define object. So something experienced by the mind. So that's not necessarily be a material thing. It could be a person, it could be in a situation, it could be an abstract idea. Anything that the mind can relate to as something. So there's no subject without an object. And when there is an object present, the subject, the mind, must likewise be present. So I told you that like, you know, this was like, the thought here could be very abstract. So what are we aware of now? So what are we aware of now? What are you aware of now? And we'll never experience the mind independent of things around us or in us to know. So there's no mind in the abstract, separate sense of to what the mind is knowing. Can you for a moment just stop and imagine what it would be like to be without being aware, to just be without being aware of anything? Well, Buddhism would say that this doesn't happen, this side of enlightenment anyway. Now, we don't know what the Buddha's enlightenment experience might be like, but we can say that Buddhism would say that this doesn't happen, this side of enlightenment anyway. We can say that much anyway. That we can't be aware. We have to be aware of something all of the time. So thirdly, the mind is momentary. Mind is a flow of mind moments, each of which is like at least infinitesimally small amount of time, a tiny fraction of an eye blink or a flash of lightning. But we don't need to take this too literally. Rather, this is a way of pointing out that mind moments succeed one another too quickly to be distinguishable from normal consciousness. Just like the way our eye can't distinguish the individual frames in a film that we're watching. But by seeing mind as a swift and endless succession of mind moments, we break down our habitual deluded assumption that we have this fixed sense or fixed self of sense, or fixed sense of self. So we instead experience a connected flow of experience, which is what it actually is. So this connected flow of experience rather than this fixed sense. So essentially our mental events are specific events that arise within each mind moment. And events are happenings, not sort of substantial things. They're just things that arise. They're not substantial things. So they're not discrete happenings, but aspects of a larger happening that is the mind moment. So I think this is something that we need to sort of read and reflect on over time. But are there any questions on this? I'm sure it has brought up lots of thoughts in, but like it is rather abstract. Well, essentially, it is, the mind is like a bit like um, a realm of consciousness. Um, but then again, we might sort of, well, I want to do two reflections before we finish, that we might sort of try and, in our own experience, as we sit, try and discover, like, it's like, if the mind is some realm of consciousness, can we discover where it is? Can we discover what it is? So let's do that. And maybe there might be a few questions that will come out of that. So what we're going to do, we're going to sit for about 15 minutes. So just where you are, just try and come into relation with the relationship with your body. And you can do that by just coming into having a sense of contact, the contact with wherever you're sitting, with your surroundings wherever you are, but particularly contact with wherever you're sitting. So a sense of your body. And it's probably best that you close your eyes so you don't sort of get distracted by your surroundings, but aware of them at the same time, aware of sounds, aware of what's around you, and coming into contact with your body, aware of the various movements in your body, but particularly the movement of your breath in your body, and the calming effect that can have on your experience. So particularly in the abdomen, feeling the breath in the abdomen, the movement in and out of the butt muscles of the abdomen, and the sort of movement of the diaphragm. And if you can experience this, the movement in the sort of pelvic floor. So just starting to sort of become, again, in relationship, get into a relationship with the breath in the body. Just following that breath. Just being aware of that breath. Not in any sharp, focused way. You're just aware of this breath in the body, but also aware of our general experience of sound around us without following that sound. Sense of hearing rather than listening to. Also this sense of our other sensation in our body relating to our contact with whatever we're sitting on. So aware of the breath and aware of all the sensation in our body at the same time. So we're going to drop a few reflections into our experience of sitting here. So what is the mind? So just turning that over. Does the mind have a colour? Does it have a shape? Can you find the mind in the body? And if so, where does it reside? You might drop in a reflection like a pebble into a small pond and just watching the ripples. Something like the mind is transparent. mind is momentary. I'm just going to invite you to put any comments you might have into the chat. Could you find the mind? If you did, where did you find it? Right, that's interesting. Mind as collective mental activity and awareness of that activity, or soul and spirit. Okay. Not saying there are right or wrong answers. Okay, that's interesting, because the mind, sometimes we have this, Sharon, this idea that like the mind is all about our brain. It's not, of course. In Buddhism, the word is chitta, and it essentially means mind, heart. It's much more than our cognitive experience. It's our emotional experience as well. Like, I think if I was to experience it, it's always somewhere around, like in my torso somewhere, rather than in my head. Yeah, I suppose, like, you said, Alexandra, in my core. Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah, that's good. That it's idea, Kathleen, that the mind is not fixed. So we have this potential for change. Did anybody feel that the mind wasn't even contained within the body? Like, potential is there we go. Maybe like to the conversation from the other room, that it was like Maybe it wasn't actually bigger. It's bigger than yourself, like, yeah. So let's do another one. Slightly different, looking at it in a different way. Again, just sort of setting yourself up. Maybe it's easier this time to get back into the body, back into a sense of the breath, of just sitting with our experience as it changes moment to moment. So we're going to explore these three qualities of the mind for a few minutes. But first, again, getting back into relationship with the body, a relationship with the breath, and just sitting with our experience. And once we've settled into our body, just drop into a sense of reflection. So starting with this idea of cognition. And reflect on how we're always aware of something. And just see if you can notice what your mind is aware of at each moment. Just begin to explore if it's possible to have awareness without any subject. And even subtle qualities such as a sense of spaciousness and openness are enough of a subject for the mind to be aware of. So now ask yourself what you're seeing with. Can the mind see the mind? Or is there just the mind looking? And if so, what is it that looks? Now spending a little time reflecting on how the mind is momentary, how it's changing. So we don't have to be aware of the tiny, infinitesimally small periods of time that are mentioned in the tradition. But can we see how the mind is constantly moving, changing, flickering around? Does it make a difference to see it more like a series of mind moments than a constant experience? Does this help to loosen up your sense of things and of yourself? Right, yeah. Becoming aware of the awareness of trying to be aware, and trying to not focus on something is a form of focusing. Yeah. Mind is strange, isn't it? Or what? And yeah, what is the mind indeed? Yeah, so what I'm going to ask you to do is to do something like, is to spend, so home practice for the week is basically a week of reflecting. So there are some questions, and these will come in the email, the follow-up email, along with the video of this morning. So the first one is, in your daily life, does it feel as if there are simply just two kinds of thoughts that you can do as described by the Buddha, so the impure and the pure? If not, can you simplify things so that you can see them in this way? Or is it more nuanced than this for you? So maybe exploring that in reflection. And reflecting too, what do you understand to be the difference between a positive and a negative mental state? Excuse me. And can you think of examples of how mental states have directly affected your experience of the world? So how a positive mental state has maybe made a difference in the world for you, or how a negative mental state has made a difference. And again, it's like, how does seeing the mind as having of the following affect your experience of yourself? So as it being transparent, as it being cognition, as it being momentary. So we're exploring these in the coming days as you live your life. Just on and off, like, just as you go about your life, but in a sort of more formal, reflective sense. So like I'd like to emphasize that you get more from the course if you do these home reflections. But don't feel like that you've got to do it all unless you've got lots and lots of time and are really keen. I know we all have busy lives, so it's like I'm trying to sort of juggle all sorts of things, so I wouldn't have time to do all this. But it is very good to do what we can do. It's fine to focus on one or two aspects and stay with them. Or you can simply read the notes that you'll get with the email and then reflect upon it yourself. Or use the questions for reflection. Or spend some time in meditation reflecting on what you've done too. There's all sorts of sort of suggestions in the homework. But what I suggest is that you spend, at least do 10 minutes a day if you can. It's not a whole lot of time. And just try and decide how you might go about this. Was that I like that idea, Mairead again. The mind is like a camera darting around trying to find something to focus on. Yeah, like a never-ending film. Yeah. So yeah, we're out of time. It's 11:30 or 12:31, should I say? What I'll do, I can't do it to this morning because I've to meet a friend and go to see a play. You have to eat beforehand. But from next week on, I will stay on after the class for 15 minutes or so, and we can just open out the chat. We won't record it. We'll turn the recording off then. But so we can just open cameras, open chat about the subject. So next week we look at these, like I said, about these constants in our experience and explore that. So yeah, enjoy the week, enjoy the reflections, and we can sort of chat about next week how you got on with that. Okay? So see you next week. Okay?